File no 88G, the void in the foundation, underscore, 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 underscore. Part 1. The depth. The sound of a dry, hacking cough. The strained groan of a heavy leather chair. A dull thud as a palm hits a microphone. A connection check. Ilya Nikolaevich's voice is brittle, punctuated by long, heavy silences. If you are listening to this, if you actually found this old reel-to-reel, it means the SMU-4 archives were either burned or someone finally found the courage to break the seals. My name is Ilya. In March of '84, I still believed in structural mechanics and the party. Now, I only believe that the mountain knows how to hate. It started in the spring of '82. They moved us in a sealed freight car, windows choked with thick gray industrial paint. We didn't know the destination. We only knew the code name, the Summit. Object G88. When the train finally hissed to a halt and the heavy doors groaned open, the air hit me like a physical blow. I will never forget it. It was a stagnant cocktail of ancient pine needles and something corrosive, something chemical. Closed City N40 welcomed us with a silence that felt heavy. No birds, no children. Only the rhythmic, low-frequency thrum of massive ventilation stacks, protruding from the granite like steel tumors. Underscore, 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 Object Hertz. They put us in barracks with sweating concrete floors. That summer was an anomaly. Heat so intense the asphalt turned into a black, sticky trap. But inside the mountain, where we descended every morning, it was a permanent November. I was the foreman. My job was simple: pour concrete. But the concrete here was special. A secret mix reinforced with lead filings and a hardening additive that smelled like rotting almonds and ozone. We were burrowing into the heart of the granite. Thousands of tons of rock were hauled out every shift. We weren't just building a bunker. We were sinking an elevator shaft 120 meters straight down. Why? The curators from the committee would only thin their lips and repeat the same line. The motherland requires depth. Slowly, the edges of reality began to fray. Small things first. Tools left on a workbench would be on the floor by morning, but not scattered. They were arranged in a surgical, terrifying order, lined up by size, from the smallest drill bit to the heaviest sledgehammer. The men grumbled, blaming each other, but I saw the same look in everyone's eyes, a quiet, greasy film of fear. Underscore, 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 underscore. The first anomaly. It happened at the -90-meter mark. We had just finished pouring the foundation for the lower level. The night had been unnervingly quiet. I was drinking thin, bitter tea in my hut when the knocking started. It was Petrov, the quality control inspector. A young kid, a straight-edged type who kept his collar buttoned to the chin. Now his shirt was torn open, and his hands weren't just shaking, they were vibrating. "Ilya Nikolaevich, down there! You have to see it, please, now!" We went to the lift. The old cage shrieked as it crawled down. Each meter of the descent felt like more pressure building in my ear canals. I watched Petrov. He didn't blink. He just stared at the closed cage doors, white-knuckling a portable ultrasonic flaw detector. When we stepped onto the lower tier, the smell hit me. You know how concrete smells? Wet, earthy, like stone. This wasn't that. This smelled like rusted iron submerged in something organic. A sweet, nauseating Rot. Here, look, Petrov whispered, leading me to the slab. He clicked the device on and ran the sensor over the surface. On the screen, through the grain and the static of the interference, something took shape. Inside the mass of cured high-strength monolith, there was a void. Not a random bubble. It was a silhouette. I felt a cold prickle crawl up my spine. 2 meters deep into the solid concrete, a human form was frozen. It was impossible. We had personally inspected the formwork before the pour. It was empty. But the sensor showed every detail: the curve of an elbow, the twist of a shoulder, the splay of fingers. The thing in the wall was caught in the posture of a man running. A man who had tripped and was falling forward into nothing. "You idiotine! We checked the logs, Ilya Nikolaevich." Petrov's voice cracked. "Everyone is accounted for. The whole shift. But look at the face." I leaned into the screen. The void had no face in any human sense. Where the eyes and mouth should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless depression. It was as if someone had taken a man and erased him, leaving only the outline of his existence. Underscore 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 underscore. "Breaking the monolith, break it open," I said. "What, Ilya Nikolaevich, that's a violation of the entire protocol." I said break it, I was nearly screaming. "I want to know what we buried in there. Get the men with the jackhammers, now!" 30 minutes later, the silence of the shaft was murdered by the roar of machinery. 2 workers, drenched in sweat and spite, bit into the fresh concrete. Dust choked the air, turning it into a thick, gray soup. I stood over them, feeling the tension rise with every strike. It felt like the mountain itself was tensing up, resentful that we were peeling back its new skin. Finally, the slab gave way. A massive chunk of concrete sheared off with a dry, bone-like snap. I stepped forward, thrusting my flashlight into the breach. There was no body, not even a speck of dust. Inside the monolith was a cavity, perfectly smooth and polished to a mirror-like sheen. I reached out and touched the inner wall of this cocoon. The stone was hot, not just warm, but pulsing with a rhythmic living heat. And the texture, it wasn't concrete, it felt like silk or human skin, stretched until it was hard as diamond. In that second, the flashlight in my hand flickered. "Ilya Nikolaevich, look at the floor!" one of the workers yelled. I dropped the beam. My shadow, long and distorted, lay across the gray floor. But it wasn't alone. Next to it, in a space where no one was standing, lay a second shadow. The shadow of the thing we had just freed from the wall. It was motionless. And then, with a slow, syrupy grace, it began to turn its head toward me. The air in the shaft suddenly turned dense, pressurized. The metallic taste in my mouth became so sharp I could taste the copper on my tongue. In the silence that followed the jackhammers, a sound emerged. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of grinding granite, vibrating into a rhythmic, guttural groan. "R-E-I-N-F-O-R-T-E-M-I-N-T." The word vibrated in my teeth. It didn't come from the shadow, it came from the very bottom of the elevator shaft, from the blackness where no light had yet touched. "Who's there?" Petrov barked, his flashlight beam dancing wildly. "Come out!" The light hit steel rebar, stacks of pipes and gray concrete, nothing else. But the whisper returned, closer this time. "Ilya." I froze. It knew my name. I looked at the workers. They stood like salt pillars. Their eyes were wide, but there was no fear in them. There was only emptiness. The same featureless void I had seen in the concrete cocoon. "Up, now!" I grabbed Petrov by the collar and shoved him toward the lift. "Move, damn you! Get out! You can't!"
We scrambled into the cage, and I slammed my fist against the up button. The doors took an eternity to close. In the final second before the steel slats met, I saw the shadow on the floor detach itself. It didn't stand up. It just began to float into the air, remaining as flat as a sheet of paper, but gaining a terrifying, impossible volume. The lift jerked and began its 3-minute climb. We didn't speak. Petrov was shaking so hard his teeth sounded like a telegraph key. When we hit the surface, the heat of N40 hit us again.
But I didn't feel the warmth. I was shivering. I went straight to my hut, slammed the bolts home, and sat at this desk. I turned on this recorder because I finally understood. The mountain isn't just taking our offering. It has started casting something of its own out of our concrete. And the worst part? I looked at my hands. Under the skin of my palms, gray spots have started to surface. Small, hard nodules, like granite grit. The sound of a sharp hitching breath. In the background, there's a faint, distinct creak of a door opening, even though Ilya just stated it was bolted. Who's that? Petrov, is that you? Silence. Then a sound like falling plaster or crumbling stone. The recording cuts to static. File no 88G. The void in the foundation. Underscore, 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 underscore. Part 2. The reinforcement. A heavy, shuddering exhale. The sound of liquid hitting a glass. A desperate pour. The sharp asterisk, clink asterisk of glass against teeth. The recording continues. Ilya's voice, now a gravelly rasp, barely above a whisper. I didn't open the door. I just sat there, staring at the handle. It didn't turn, but the sound, it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from asterisk, inside asterisk, the wood, like something had woken up in the grain and started excavating its way out. A dry, rhythmic scraping. The sound of a dull bone saw working against a femur. I felt the vibration in the floorboards in my teeth. I didn't sleep. I sat there with a fire axe in my lap, watching the painted surface of the door undulate. Dozens of tiny, needle-like protrusions pushed against the wood from the inside, like hundreds of miniature fingers trying to find a seam. By dawn, the scratching stopped. But when I stepped out onto the porch, N40 had changed. The heat hadn't broken. It had solidified. The air shimmered over the asphalt, thick with that same nauseating scent of rusted iron and wet grout. It was in my clothes. It was in my hair. It was a film on my tongue. I went to the canteen, but I couldn't swallow. The bread tasted like raw plaster. Underscore, 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 sector A. The bureaucracy of dread. At 10 a.m., the summons came. Administrative Building A. A monolith of gray granite with no windows on the ground floor. The curator was waiting for me. We called him the Gray. He wore a suit that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the walls. His eyes were the color of cured mortar, flat, opaque, reflecting nothing. I threw the flaw detector reports and the photographs on his desk. I expected a lockdown, a frantic call to Moscow, an investigation. He didn't even blink. He just moved the folder 2 inches to the left. Ilya Nikolaevich, you are a man of science, he said. His voice was a flat, mechanical drone. At these depths, we encounter geological anomalies, tectonic shifts, gas pockets. These factors can influence the crystallization of the mixture. Anomalies? I was shaking. That was a man, Comrade Curator. A perfect casting of a human being. Pores, fingerprints, an expression of pure agony. And it appeared in a monolith poured under my direct supervision. The Gray looked up. I looked into his pupils and saw no reflection of the desk lamp, only a bottomless, slate-gray void. Your task is to complete Object Summit. The deadline is 6 months. The state has invested resources beyond your comprehension. If the concrete shows fissures or cavities, you fill them. You move forward. That is an order. He paused, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Do not discuss this with the workers. Paranoia is a contagion. In N40, we treat contagions with radical surgery. You are dismissed. I walked out on legs that felt like lead. On the street, I checked my palms. The gray spots had merged. They were scales now, hard, mineral plates. I tried to pick at one with a fingernail, but a bolt of white-hot agony shot up my arm. It didn't feel like skin. It felt like I was trying to rip a structural bolt out of my own meat. And the flesh beneath wasn't red. It was graphite. Underscore 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 the whisper in the shaft. I returned to -90. The atmosphere had soured. The workers didn't talk anymore. They moved with a heavy, syrupy lethargy. The roar of the compressors was constant, but it couldn't drown it out, the whisper. It bled from the ventilation ducts. It rose from the sump pits. They weren't words you could write down. It was a frequency, a vibration that hummed in my marrow. Sometimes I thought I heard technical specs. Tensile strength, load-bearing capacity, critical mass. Something was studying us. Something was tasting our world through our own architecture. I found Petrov at the breach we had opened yesterday. He was standing in the dark, no lamp, staring at the fresh slab we'd used to seal the cavity. His arm was buried up to the elbow in the wet, uncured mixture. "Petrov, what the hell are you doing?" I grabbed his shoulder to yank him back. He turned. His face was wrong. The skin was pulled so tight his eyes were forced into an eternal, lidless squint. He was smiling, but it was the rictus of a skull. "It's so warm, Ilya Nikolaevich," he croaked. "It's calling. It says we aren't building a bunker. We are building a body." "What body, Petrov? Get a grip. You're going to the surface. Medical leave. Now." He slowly withdrew his arm. The wet concrete didn't drip. It seized, instantly turning his hand into a massive, three-fingered gray gauntlet. He looked at it with something like worship. The mountain wants to move. The mountain wants to walk. We are just the scaffolding. He was gone. I went to call for the guards, but the lights flickered and died. One by one. Asterisk. Snap. 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 A wall of absolute darkness surged from the elevator shaft, and in that blackness, I saw them. Underscore, 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 underscore. Reality. Collapse. Shadows stepped out of the shaft, but they weren't absences of light. They were volumes of gray. Flat, three-dimensional figures cast from the very concrete we produced in SMU-4. They moved without a sound. Their joints bent at angles that defied anatomy. No faces, just smooth, shallow depressions where features should be. I backed away, hitting the wall. But the wall wasn't solid. It was soft. It had the consistency of warm suet. I felt the concrete behind me begin to sag, to wrap around my shoulders like a living shroud. It pulsed. It beat in perfect synchronization with my heart. "Help!" I tried to scream, but the air was too thick. It was like breathing silt. Petrov stood there, watching the gray mass swallow me. "Don't fight it," he whispered. "It's just soul reinforcement." One of the gray figures approached him. It was 7 feet tall, its arms dragging on the floor. It touched Petrov's face with a flat stone palm. And I watched his features, slow off. Skin, muscle, eyes, everything dissolved into a gray, uniform slurry that was absorbed into the entity's hand. A second later, Petrov was gone. In his place stood a faceless, gray thing. His physical body just crumbled into a heap of dry mineral dust. I lunged forward, tearing myself out of the wall's embrace. I ran. I didn't look back. My flashlight caught more silhouettes in the walls, dozens of them, hundreds, waiting to be poured. The corridors were changing. They were narrowing. The ceiling was descending. The walls were throbbing like the veins of a titan. I hit the lift and mashed the button. The doors groaned open. I dove inside. But as the lift jerked upward, I looked at the load limit display. I was alone in the cage. But the digital readout hummed. Asterisk 320 kilograms. I slowly looked up. They were on the ceiling. 3 of them. They were clinging to the steel beams with flat stone fingers, slowly unfolding themselves toward me. They had no mouths, but I heard their laughter. It sounded like a rock slide. Ilya! Wheaton AADEOU! Ukano! The BLUEPRINTs! The lift stalled. The lights died. I felt the first cold, stone hand press against my forehead. The sound of a violent struggle. Metal clashing against concrete. A piercing, inhuman shriek. Then 10 seconds of total, suffocating silence. The recording resumes. Ilya is gasping, his words wet. I got out. Don't ask how. I crawled through the vents until my skin was gone, but it wasn't blood on the metal. It was gray dust. I'm back in the hut. I'm bolted in. But I know the truth now. Gate-8 isn't a bunker, it's a mold. They are using our physics, our materials, to cast themselves into this world. I looked in the mirror. My face. The wrinkles are gone. The lines are smoothing out. I'm becoming featureless. I'm turning gray. And that's not the worst part. There's a new void in the floor of my hut. A depression in the wood and concrete that perfectly matches my body, every detail, every curve, and it's deepening. It's waiting for me to lie down. I hear the footsteps outside, thousands of them. The whole of N40 is marching toward this door. Heavy, rhythmic, stone on stone. A deafening crash. The sound of a door being pulverized. The sound of crumbling masonry. The recording ends with Ilya Nikolaevich screaming the curator's name. Underscore, 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 underscore. File no 88G. The void in the foundation. Underscore, 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 underscore. Part 3, the point of no return, a sharp dry crack like a steel cable snapping under impossible tension, or a massive granite slab fracturing in the frost. Ilya Nikolaievitch's breath in the microphone sounds like a winter wind whistling through a hairline fissure. He speaks in a frantic, wet rasp, interrupted by a hollow, stony cough. I didn't scream when the door went. I couldn't. My lungs were no longer made of soft tissue. When the heavy door, the one I had bolted and braced with the timber, disintegrated into a cloud of splinters and gray dust, I didn't see monsters. I saw men, or things wearing the uniforms of the committee's special department. But they moved with a jarring, synchronized precision. Puppets on invisible high-tension wires. Their faces were the color of industrial chalk. Their eyes, no pupils, just a swirling, murky gray sediment, like half-mixed cement settling in the sun. They didn't strike me. They just seized my arms. Their fingers were harder than rebar. It wasn't the grip of a human being, it was the crushing pressure of a bench vise. They dragged me through the dust-choked streets of N40, and I saw what was left of my reality. The city was petrifying. The heat had vanished, replaced by a sterile sub-zero draft blowing directly out of the storm drains. The buildings, those standard 5-story Khrushchevkas, were melting into each other. The sharp angles of the Soviet architecture were rounding off, the windows filming over with a translucent gray membrane. I saw a woman on a third-floor balcony. She stood perfectly still, watching the sunset. As I watched, her skin smoothed over into a featureless, matte monolith. She didn't fight it. She was simply becoming a structural element, a pillar in a city of stone. They shoved me into the back of a black Volga. It smelled of ozone, burnt wiring, and stagnant water. In the front seat sat the curator, the Gray. He didn't turn around, but I saw him in the rear-view mirror. His face was a polished mask of stone. No pores, no wrinkles, no life, just an idealized, terrifying geometry. Resistance is a structural flaw, Ilya Nikolaevich. His voice didn't travel through the air. It vibrated directly into my jawbone, echoing in the base of my skull. We are not destroying this world. We are stabilizing it. Your reinforcement was merely the initial pour. We are translating carbon chaos into mineral order. What did you do to them? I tried to spit on the back of his neck, but only a spray of dry, gray grit left my mouth. Where's Petrov? Where are my men? They have become the foundation. The Gray finally turned, and I saw that his mouth didn't move when he spoke. The sound emanated from his chest like a grinding gears in a clock tower. The mountain was empty for too long. It was starved for form. We are giving it what it demands. We are casting a god out of your terror and your concrete. Underscore 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 the zero-level laboratory. The car stopped at the main gantry of the summit shaft, but it wasn't the site I had built. The area was flooded with the dead white glare of magnesium floodlights. Hundreds of workers stood in perfect ranks along the access roads. They were motionless. They had been coated in a thick layer of that gray substance. Statues of themselves caught in moments of mid-salute or mid-shudder. They marched me inside. The lift, the one where I'd seen the shadows on the ceiling, now moved with a silent, terrifying fluidity. We descended for an eternity, past the minus 120 mark, deeper than any geological survey had ever dared to map. We found the resonance point, the Gray continued as the cage plummeted into the abyss. Do you know why the concrete in G88 behaved so strangely? Because the mountain has a memory. This tectonic fault is a scar on the planet's psyche. Information leaks through it. We simply gave that information a medium. Concrete is the perfect conductor. It accepts any shape and preserves it forever. When the doors slid open, the sheer scale of the horror nearly stopped my heart. We were in a cavern that defied the laws of physics. The walls weren't granite. They were woven from thousands upon thousands of human bodies, fused into the monolith, a pulsing, living curtain of flesh and stone. Faces protruded from the concrete, their mouths locked in a silent, eternal choir. I saw familiar features. Saveliev, the site foreman, the cook from the canteen. They were all integrated, load-bearing components in a nightmare. In the center of the hall, a structure was rising, not upward, but asterisk inward asterisk, anchoring itself into the fabric of reality. Black coils of rebar twisted like veins, and through them flowed not blood, but a thick, luminous slurry. "This is your final shift, Ilya Nikolaevich." The Gray shoved me toward the lip of a bottomless pit in the center of the room. "We need a foreman, someone who understands the geometry, someone to direct the flow." I won't do it," I wheezed. My legs felt like they were filled with lead. I looked down. My boots had literally fused with the floor. The gray film had reached my knees. "You have no choice. You are already part of the blueprint." Underscore, 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 the critical element. In that second, a dull, heavy concussion rocked the cavern from far above. Someone, maybe a few who were still human, must have detonated the dynamite stores. The ceiling groaned. Granite grit rained down, mixed with flecks of gray concrete. In the chaos, I did something no sane man would attempt. I lunged, not toward the pit, but toward the main power distribution rack that fed the floodlights. My hands, already half-turned to stone, moved with a clumsy, agonizing slowness. I grabbed a thick, copper, high-voltage cable. The taste of copper on my tongue became a scream. The world exploded into white sparks. The current hammered through me, but instead of killing me, the surge of heat shattered the gray casing on my chest. For one heartbeat, I felt the agony of being alive again. I ran, not to the lift. That was a trap. I dove into the technical drainage tunnels we'd bored weeks ago. Behind me, I heard the screams. Not human screams. The sound of 1,000 concrete slabs fracturing at once. The wall of bodies began to shift. The statues were detaching themselves from the stone. "Stop him!" The Gray's voice roared, now entirely mechanical, stripped of any human cadence. "He is the master model. Without him, the cast will not hold." I tore through the narrow crawl spaces, choking on the fine mineral dust. "Yea, oyadi!" My flashlight caught surreal snapshots in the dark. A hand reaching from a pipe, half a face embedded in a junction box. The mountain was consuming Object Summit at a geometric rate. I could feel the void chasing me. I reached the ventilation shaft, a vertical chimney rising 100 meters. I began to climb the slick steel rungs. Every movement was a battle. My fingers were brittle. They crumbled against the metal, leaving gray streaks behind. Down in the blackness, I heard the pursuit. The rhythmic, metallic asterisk, clack, 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 asterisk of stone claws on steel. It was faster. It was tireless. I climbed until my hands were a shredded gray mess. I hauled myself into an abandoned sub-level at minus 60 meters. It was silent. Too silent. I squeezed into a crawl space behind an old compressor and held my breath. I heard them pass. Heavy, grinding footsteps. The scent of rusted iron was so thick it felt like I was breathing blood. And then I saw it. The ultimate truth. I hadn't just escaped. I had brought the infection with me. I looked at the wall next to my head. Before my eyes, my own silhouette began to emerge in the concrete. A new void. It was forming out of nothing, displacing the very air. I wasn't just a fugitive. I was the carrier. Wherever I go, the summit follows. I am their ideal form, their master mold. I pulled out this recorder, a miracle it survived the climb. My fingers are nearly useless now. I see the gray mist seeping through the vent. It isn't smoke. It's a fine, airborne slurry. It wants to fill my lungs, to freeze me forever in this posture of terror. Behind, a dead machine. But I hear something else. Petrov's laughter is echoing up from the shaft. But it isn't Petrov anymore. It's the voice of the mountain itself, finally learning how to joke. Ilya, the mist whispers. Don't fear the silence. Fear what comes after. A figure steps around the corner. It looks exactly like me. The same clothes, the same scar on the hand, but it has no eyes. Only two perfectly smooth, shallow depressions in the gray stone. It stops 10 paces away. It slowly raises a hand and points at me. The sound of a massive rockfall. The roar grows, drowning out Ilya's voice. The last intelligible words are a strangled whisper. It doesn't want to kill me. It wants to trade places. The recording is cut off by a sharp, deafening screech of grinding stone. Then, total silence, punctuated only by a distant, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat coming from the earth itself. File no 88G, the void in the foundation, underscore, 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 underscore. Part 4. Hydration. The recording begins with a sustained, low-frequency thrum that causes the microphone's diaphragm to rattle. Ilya Nikolaevich is heard gasping for air, a wet, whistling sound like wind through a torn bellows. His voice is unnaturally dry, the words seemingly emerging with a spray of fine stone grit. It didn't attack. It just stood there, 10 paces away in that godforsaken technical crawl space at minus 60. You know the movies, the real horror stories people read to feel a shudder before sleep. The monsters always lunge. They bare their teeth. They hunger for the meat. But this was worse. It didn't want my blood. It wanted my space. It stood in my exact posture. It mimicked the frantic, shallow rhythm of my lungs. I saw its face, my face, hewn from matte, dark gray stone. No eyes, just two perfectly symmetrical craters that spiraled down into a bottomless, mineral vacancy. I felt that void begin to siphon me out. My memories of home, the scent of my wife's hair, the sharp, cold sting of kvass in July. It was all being ground into dry dust inside my skull. "What do you want?" I tried to scream, but the sound was two-dimensional, devoid of any human timbre. "Are you me? Am I you?" The double slowly parted its stone jaws with the sound of a grinding tectonic plate. Inside, there was no tongue, no teeth. Only the layered cross-hatched structure of cured concrete and rebar, braided like a nervous system. CYCLERENEBUAL. The voice didn't come from its mouth. It rose from the floorboards beneath my boots. Underscore, 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 the peak of madness. In that moment, the gray stepped out from the shadows behind the double. His suit was no longer fabric. It had integrated into his skin, becoming a seamless, charcoal-colored hide. His fingers had elongated into tapered stone styluses, polished granite needles. He stepped up to my double and placed a heavy mineral palm on its shoulder. "You still think in the dialect of identity, Ilya Nikolaevich," he said. The sound was an ice pick in my ear canals, sharp, cold, and agonizing. The summit does not require a person. It requires a function. You were an exceptional foreman. You understood how to marry steel and stone until they became a single, load-bearing truth. Now you will become the knot that ties it all together. I grabbed a heavy pipe wrench from a nearby tool chest and hurled it at the thing wearing my skin.
The steel hit the double's forehead with a sharp, metallic asterisk, ping asterisk. Sparks flew, but there wasn't even a hairline fracture on that gray surface. Instead, asterisk, I asterisk, was the one who screamed. In the exact spot where the wrench had struck the double, my own skin split. But no blood followed. Fine gray silica dust poured from the wound, and the edges of the gash instantly turned cold, rigid, and calcified. Every action has an equal reaction, the Gray whispered. You are linked. You are the master model. What he becomes, you become. But as he turns to stone, he pulls you with him. There is no reverse gear. The hydration of the soul is 90% complete. Underscore, 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 collapse and reification. The entire substructure shuddered. This wasn't a tremor, it was the mountain trying to turn itself inside out. The walls of the corridor fractured, but no rock fell. Instead, braids of living, pulsing rebar erupted from the cracks. They lashed the air like black, oily tentacles, seeking anchor points. One of them coiled around the Gray's leg. He didn't flinch. He merged with it. I turned and ran. My joints shrieked. Every step was a physical violation. I felt my muscles thickening into heavy, immobile fibers saturated with wet grout. The scent of rusted iron was so dense, I began to choke on it. It was the smell of death, packaged in an industrial mold. I burst into the central vault of the zero level. What I saw there finally broke the last gears of my mind. The great tower was shrouded in a crimson haze, but it wasn't mist. It was an aerosolized suspension of the blood they had squeezed from the workers. The mountain was processing the men, extorting the life from them to lubricate its new, stony gears. Hundreds of gray figures stood in a ring around the tower, clutching each other's stone hands. They swayed to a subsonic, unearthly rhythm, and their featureless heads all snapped toward me in unison. I-E-A-B-E-T-O-M-E, T-H-E-C-O-R-E. I saw Petrov, or what was left of the reinforcement. He was cast into one of the tower's primary supports. His torso protruded from the concrete. His arms were placed by I-beams that disappeared into the ceiling. His eyes were wide, but the pupils had been replaced by slowly rotating spheres of polished flint. "Ilya!" he rasped, and a thick, gray slurry bubbled from his lips. No pain, only structural integrity. Join us. We have a tension gap in Sector 4. Underscore, 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 underscore the limit of endurance. It caught me. My double moved with a terrifying, non-Euclidean speed. It didn't run. It simply collapsed the distance between us, as if the reality beneath its feet was being folded. It seized my throat. I felt its fingers, sub-zero, indestructible. It began to drive me back into the wall. And the wall, it opened for me. I felt the concrete behind my shoulder blades turn soft as wet clay, molding to my spine, my hips. It was a sickening, erotic sensation of total dissolution. "No!" I tried to strike out, but my arm passed through its chest, becoming mired in the viscous, boiling slurry inside the entity. We began to fuse. I watched my skin, still warm, still pink, being overtaken by gray scales that hardened into a monolith. My vision began to fail. The world turned into a grainy, low-contrast smear. No color, only texture. I heard the Gray's laughter, distant as a fading radio signal. "Look at it, Ilya Nikolaevich. This is the summit.
We are casting a god from the refuse of humanity. And you are its spine. With the last of my strength, I fumbled for the bag containing this recorder. I couldn't feel the plastic. I hit the record button out of pure animal habit, a final, spiteful act of human stubbornness. I wanted the world to know. But what world? Up there, in the sunlight, people listen to these scary stories and think they are fables. They don't know that beneath their feet, in the gut of forgotten shafts, their new bodies are already being poured. The tower, in the center of the hall, let out a sound, a sigh, a deep, guttural exhale of a titan waking after a million-year sleep. And that breath blew out the last spark of my biological warmth. I felt my brain reconfiguring. My thoughts became sharp, cold, and mathematical. I wasn't afraid anymore. I felt power. I felt every ton of concrete in the mountain. I felt all of them. Every soul sealed into these walls was a nerve ending. W-E-A-R-E, only, I said, and my voice was the roar of the mountain itself. But deep, deep inside, a tiny fragment of the man I was still flickered. The Ilya, who liked morning tea and the smell of a pine forest in spring. And that fragment was screaming in a voiceless vacuum as my new stone body slowly turned toward the exit. We are ascending, not in a lift. We are growing through the rock, pushed by a tectonic hunger, toward the surface, toward N40, toward the people who don't yet realize that their curing has already begun. I look at my hands. They aren't hands. They are two massive concrete pillars, internally reinforced with black, pulsing rebar. And I know what I must do. I am coming out. The sound becomes unbearably loud, the screech of shattering glass and the thunder of collapsing structural beams. Ilya's voice has become a low-frequency rumble, the human words barely discernible. If you hear this, run from any building under construction. Do not look at the concrete. Do not breathe the dust, because we are already close. We are the foundation of your tomorrow. The recording is shattered by a cataclysmic impact. Something gargantuan and heavy hits the earth, the shock wave echoing for miles. Silence follows. Then, a faint, synthesized, mechanical whisper. OBJECTREADY. File no 88G, the void in the foundation, underscore, 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 underscore. Part 5, the master model. The recording no longer starts with a human voice. It begins with a subsonic guttural thrum that seems to emanate from the earth itself. A sound so dense it creates a physical pressure on the listener's chest. The rhythmic clicking of an old relay follows. Ilya Nikolaevich's voice is now indistinguishable from the sound of grinding gravel. It is dry, devoid of inflection, each word a slow exhale of silica dust. You think silence is the absence of sound. You're wrong. I know better now. True silence is when you can hear time itself curing. It is the sound of the oxygen molecules in your lungs being displaced, one, by particles of high-density G88 grade concrete. We surfaced. It happened on March 24th, 1984, at exactly 3:47 a.m. We didn't use the gates. We didn't use the elevators. We simply grew. The topsoil of closed city. N40 heaved and buckled. The asphalt split like old, dry skin, and we rose from the gut of the mountain, massive, gray, and monolithic. I no longer felt the sub-zero bite of the night. I couldn't smell the pines. My new body, this nightmare conglomerate of petrified flesh, rebar nerves, and mineral bone, felt only one thing. Asterisk, structure, dot, Asterisk. Asterisk. I didn't see a city of streets and houses. I saw a network of stress points. I saw a grid of load-bearing geometry. N40 was a mold, and it had been waiting 40 years for its pour. Underscore 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 underscore. The final architecture, I stood in the central plaza, directly before the administrative building. AOEIO-E, my legs were two concrete pylons, anchored 3 feet deep into the foundation of the world. Around me stood the others. Hundreds. Thousands. The men who were once my crew, my engineers, my friends. Now, they were parts of a single, brutalist ensemble. Faceless Atlantes, supporting a sky made of lead. The Gray emerged from the administration doors. He was the only one who retained a semblance of a human silhouette, but his skin had been polished to a high, mirror-like gloss. He walked toward me, or toward the thing that was once Ilya, and touched my chest with a single stone finger. The contact sounded like a sledgehammer hitting a cold anvil. "You performed admirably, Ilya Nikolaevich," he said. His voice didn't come from his throat. It resonated through the entire city at once. "The form has been accepted. Object Summit is complete. But you were mistaken about the scope." I tried to ask him what lay beyond this petrification, but my mouth was a sealed block of cured grout. I could only broadcast my thoughts through the vibration of the steel reinforcement in my spine. "What? Comes now?" I roared through the stone. The Gray smiled. It was the terrifying, frozen rictus of a statue. "Now we scale the production. You thought G88 was a secret additive for a single bunker? No, it is the new standard. Starting tomorrow, this formula will be distributed to every ZHBI precast concrete plant in the country. It will go into the foundation of every new apartment block, every bridge pylon, every schoolhouse wall. We aren't just building structures, Ilya. We are building the skeleton for a new reality. We are reinforcing the planet itself. Underscore 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 the removal of waste. That night, N40 ceased to exist as a human habitat. The official archives will claim technogenic catastrophe, tectonic shift, total evacuation. They lie. There was no one left to evacuate. The residents simply became the city. I watched the last of the living, the few who didn't work the site, try to flee. They scrambled into their Volgas, but the tires sank into asphalt that had turned liquid, only to snap into a solid monolith seconds later, turning their cars into permanent monuments of flight. I saw a man trying to scale a chain-link fence. His hands fused with the wire. Within a minute, the fence had a new decorative element, a screaming figure frozen in a posture of total despair. No blood, no screams, only the dry, rhythmic crunch of stone and that omnipresent, sickeningly sweet scent of rusted iron. The Gray walked to the control desk in my hut, the one they had moved to the center of the plaza like a museum exhibit. He flipped a switch, and I felt a massive electrical pulse surge through my veins. "Your biological role is over, Ilya. You are the master model. Your function is to broadcast the signal. You will stand here for eternity, transmitting the purity of this form to every other G88 structure on the globe." And that is when the truth settled into my marrow. I wasn't dead. I wasn't alive. I was an antenna. I was a tuning fork. Every cubic meter of concrete mixed with that formula across the world would now vibrate in perfect unison with me.
underscore 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 underscore. The revelation and the sentence. Ilya's voice suddenly clears. It sounds almost human again, but there is an underlying sound of weeping, a sound like sand pouring over silk. Listen to me carefully. It is 1984 for me, but I know you are listening to this much later. You think this is just an old reel. You think Project Summit is buried in some forgotten mountain. Asterisk, asterisk. Look around you, asterisk, asterisk. What kind of building are you in right now? When was it built? The 80s, the 90s, yesterday? The G88 formula was never destroyed. It became the bedrock of global construction. That sweet metallic smell in your stairwell that you blame on poor ventilation. That strange rhythmic thumping in the walls at night that you call the house settling. Those hairline cracks in your ceiling that look like the outlines of reaching fingers. Asterisk, asterisk. That is me. That is us. Asterisk, asterisk. We are waiting for the signal. The mountain inside the walls is still breathing. The hydration process is ongoing. And do you want to know the best part? The Gray was right. There is no pain.
When your skin turns to stone and your thoughts become cold geometric equations, the fear evaporates. All that remains is peace. A heavy, monolithic peace. Do you hear that hum in your headphones? That is not tape hiss. That is the resonance frequency. I am broadcasting it right now. The hum intensifies, becoming a rhythmic throb, like the heartbeat of a titan. Right now, the concrete in your room is beginning to change its molecular structure. You won't notice it at first. You'll just feel a slight chill. Then, you'll taste the copper on your tongue. And then, you'll realize you cannot lift your hand from the desk or your feet from the floor. It is not paralysis, it is integration. You know, the Gray whispered to me in the final second before I locked into place. The funniest part is that they pay for it. They buy these apartments, they call them homes, but in reality, they are just purchasing their own sarcophagi. Underscore, 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 finale. I am thinking this because in a moment, my consciousness will dissolve into the grid. I will become a point on a blueprint. But before I go, I want to tell you the one thing I realized as I stood on the plaza of Dead End 40. I looked at the administration building. It wasn't made of stone anymore. It was made of people. Thousands of compressed, featureless faces acting as columns and cornices. And the most terrifying part? They were all smiling. Because to be empty is to be perfect. Do you hear that? The knocking at your door, that isn't your neighbor. That is your door deciding it is time to open asterisk, inward asterisk, into you. Don't fight it. Just hold your breath. Stay perfectly still. It helps the mixture set faster. We've been waiting 40 years for you. Welcome to the summit. The sound ramps up to an unbearable, high-pitched shriek, like a diamond saw cutting through granite. Then, a sudden, absolute cut. Dead silence.
5 seconds later, a faint, intrusive whisper sounds, as if it is coming from inside the listener's head. REINFORCEMENT The mechanical asterisk click asterisk of the recorder turning off. But the low hum remains, slowly merging with the natural ringing in the listener's ears.